The old Sankey song. It's one of those surprising songs in Sankeys because most of them, as you know, like Blessed Assurance or To God Be the Glory, have a kind of feel and a repetition about them. And that's just a lovely, lovely song. How can I stop from singing? Well, we read together. We had the first chapter of Genesis and John's Gospel. And what is very, very true, I think, about the Christian faith is that it is full of big statements. Big claims are part and parcel of the Christian faith. And I suppose some of the things we believe bring incredulity from some people. Some of the things we say do not make sense to some people. But we keep saying them because we believe their implications is so wondrous, so important, so relevant to life in the 21st century, to your life, my life, the world's life. And we dare claim that many of the big statements that we make, many of the big things we say, we dare claim that in a sense have been taken and even said without the creedal, without the doctrinal, without the sense of God, but the sentiments and the spirit that lies behind have often been taken by humanists and other people. Some of the statements of the faith about the world, creation, humankind, redemption, have worked their way into the thoughts of other people. Belief statements that have impinged upon, claimed the thoughts and the lives of countless millions through the long centuries. And in history, in time, from the early days of the Christian faith, running right through to the present time, there have been great preachers and leaders who have strode the Christian stage. At times they have addressed the mighty who have walked the political arenas. They have given gospel hope to the marginalized, the forgotten, the displaced, the ignored. And they've taken this book of the Bible, and they've taken it into nations and peoples, into all parts of the world, of all kinds of different cultures and backgrounds. And sometimes there have been great outpourings of what has been termed the outpouring of the Spirit. And so it was, in our Methodist terms, that in the 18th century, God raised up two Anglican priests who began a new church, a new denomination, a new people called the people of the Method, who became the people called Methodists. John and Charles Wesley, Anglican priests. John Wesley, who lived to the extraordinary age of 86, still preaching at 86. Charles Wesley, his brother, who wrote around 7,000 hymns. His brother went preaching, and Charles gave him songs. John preached, Charles gave him songs for people to sing. Mighty songs, sometimes with the most soaring and great and driving melodies, so important to words. John and Charles Wesley were determined to raise up what they called a new church because they felt in the 18th century that the Anglican church of the time was not ministering to those in the industrial areas of Britain. And they felt that the church of that time had lost the verve, the energy, the power, the spirit, the drive of Christian faith. And they brought the gospel hope to the marginalized, the forgotten, the displaced, the ignored. They believe passionately that every person should be touched by the gospel, by the good news of Jesus, of the faith found in the pages of the Bible, from the creation narratives of Genesis, repeated in certain Psalms, right through to the book of Revelation, driven by the Jesus who is called the Christ. As they preached his birth, his teaching, his death, and his resurrection, and they also preached his coming again. Today in Methodism, today in the denomination to which this church belongs over time. God's good graces have been felt. Like I said today, if you're not a Methodist, all around the country, congregations are seeing new ministers, new men, new women. Sometimes when they see, they groan, and sometimes they get very happy with what they've got. And like I said, here next year, on the first Sunday of September, this church, hopefully, will be welcoming a new man or a new woman to ministry here in this area, in this church and in the other churches of the town and surrounding places. Today, throughout Methodism, there is the welcome amongst what is now reported to be, if you want some figures, 223,000 people that are said to be adherents of the Methodist Church at the moment in Britain. The membership of the Methodist Church, actual members, is said to be 176,000. Now, those of you who are into statistics, those of you who are into figures will, of course, say, and rightly say, that if you went back to the 1950s, the membership of the Methodist Church in this country then was around 560,000, and adherents took it over 1 million. The Methodist Youth Clubs, the MAYC, had a membership of over 100,000. The glory days, some would say, though interestingly, in some of the books I've got, and you read people talking about that period in time, that they were then moaning and complaining because they were not the figures which you had before the Second World War. But if you want to be positive this morning, and it's good to be positive since we're often downcast, think of any other organisation, think of any other group that exists, that meets weekly, that has a great social outreach in the community. Think of any other group that has that number of people meeting together, gathering together each week. Well, I suppose some churches will be hoping they're going to get a minister with a family. One of the events that captured the pages of the Methodist Recorder years ago was a Sunday school in Britain. It was based in Penzance, which had an 800% increase in its Sunday school. 800% increase. Now you might wonder, so where did they all come from? So it was that a new minister arrived in Penzance with 8 children. And the circuit suddenly had a Sunday school. And it was reported so in the Methodist paper. 800% increase. Today, people, like I said, throughout Methodism will be praying for the new person, the new man, or the new woman. So all I wanted to do today, and this isn't a Bible exposition, this isn't some wonderful, great sermon to thrill you to the core. It is just to say, this is the birthday, the beginning day, the new year of Methodism. And I wanted in our hymns, and I wanted in our lessons today to read and to hear and to see the big things. Because we need sometimes to excite ourselves to remember that we are part and parcel of a big faith that makes big statements. And this faith has changed the lives of so many people. And so it is in those words of Genesis 1. They are part of the Nicene Creed. We confess as believers that we believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and of all things visible and invisible. And of course, those of you who are biblical scholars will know that Psalm 19 and Psalm 104 also talk of creation. And for Jewish thinkers of the time who wrote those words, creation was first among the mighty acts of God. It is about the covenant that God has made with the people. Throughout the Old Testament, it is about the saving act of God. It is about bringing people together under his law in his fellowship. That God's plan of salvation is being worked out through a continuous process of recreation. Redemption itself has a creative dimension. And like I said, these words, especially from the book of Genesis, from the story, from the outline of creation as seen, are words and thoughts that surely are so much part of general culture today. As we think of planet change, as more and more people are beginning to realize that creation, nature, the world, animals are not just there for man to be misused, they are there for our beauty and for our life. The New Testament, of course, goes on to the redemptive work of Jesus, of the new creation. In the book of Genesis, in that first chapter, human beings are given the responsibility for the right ordering and the preservation of what God has made. The human creation there is not for man to abuse, for man to misuse. And as we survey our world today with all the pollution in the seas and the skies, and the ravaging nature of many cultures and peoples with nature and the forests of the world, the message of Genesis is that human beings are given the responsibility for the right ordering and the preservation of what God has made. We are appointed stewards of the earth, and we must work for the sustaining of the gifts of creation. We are called to a caring partnership with the Spirit to work of recreating our world. John 1, of course, links with Genesis. In John 1, we're taking into heavenly places. There it's about restoring relationships. In the Old Testament, reconciliation has to do chiefly with the restoration of Israel's relationship with God. In the New Testament, it signifies the restoration of human relationship with God. If Genesis talks to us about the use of the world about us, the plants, the trees, the fields, the cattle, therefore our good, it says, but to be used responsibly, then in John's Gospel it is taken on to another level of plane of existence, that God was in Christ, says Paul, reconciling the world to himself. It's about the scope of reconciliation to the whole world. It is saying, in John's Gospel, it is saying that the peoples of the world were never intended to be apart, that the peoples of the world were never intended to be at war. It is saying the people were created not to be divisive, not to separate on the basis of colour or on the basis of smell, or on the basis of what you have. Nations were not intended to bleed others of their goods, were not intended to differentiate, to claim at the expense and to subjugate other people. That was not what God intended to create, and that is why we have the church. Sometimes it fails, sometimes it itself doesn't witness to its own truth, but at its best it is the place, and this should be a place here in this town, in this church, where men and women can come into contact with God, where men and women can feel the thrill and the power of a gospel that is intended to unite people, not to divide, a place where people of all shapes and kinds are welcome and are not separated because of this and that. A church that remembers and sometimes forgets, but a church that should remember that they're walking with the Christ who ate with sinners and tax collectors. We could have read today the great Magnificat of Mary, the great assertion, the great preeminence of a woman with an extraordinary rereading of what are words which are found in the Old Testament. Mary repeats and gives them a new light. Running right through to the book of Revelation that speaks of a new world. Or we could have settled today, if we're looking at the Bible, at 1 Corinthians 13, Paul's great words of love, that love is political and spiritual power, the power to have faith in a new order where all of creation will live in justice in peace and integrity. These are the gifts. These are the gifts of the Holy Spirit. Sometimes I suggest you will see. Sometimes you will not see. Sometimes I suggest this whole edifice, this whole thing of the church with its doctrines, its constitutions, its bureaucracies. But sometimes it all hangs together when it is serving humankind, when it is there saving the souls of men and women and bringing them into the fellowship of God. Because running right through from creation of Genesis right through to Revelation, it is about men and women having a relationship with God. Men and women living out the way in which it has been seen and given as we read it in the New Testament, in the Gospels. I ask you today, in these difficult days and situations, to rejoice in the faith. But I know sometimes you will see. And I know sometimes you will not see. There are times when it all, like I said, makes complete sense. And everything comes together. And there are other times, of course, when you may feel quite different. You may feel it just moving away from you. Moving away. And when it does, if it does move, and if it does start to depart, then, my friends, then I ask you, you have to go back and you have to look at your life, and you have to find those moments when it did happen, when it did mean something so big and so personal that in more evangelical language, you were, at that point, you decided to give your life. Maybe at some revival campaign, or maybe just in a service, maybe in a little prayer meeting, maybe in a small gathering, but at that moment you said, I am yours, Lord. This is where I belong, this is where I will be, and this is where I will spend my life in your presence, searching and looking and understanding and living out the faith that has inspired through ages and through time. Here we are in 2020. It must have been quite extraordinary to have been at the feet of somebody like John and his gospel, musing, thinking, in a very difficult world which he belonged, a world that was not at all at peace with itself. The Jewish people under persecution, the people who call themselves Christians were under persecution. People who call themselves Christians thrown to the lions for sport. But somehow, hearing words, powerful words, inspired, and people believed. People believed. So today, rejoice in the faith. Sometimes you will not see. Sometimes you will. And that's a mighty day and a mighty time when it happens.